On November 13, 1961, a crew member aboard the oil tanker Gulf Lion observed a man frantically signaling for help from a small dinghy. The man's urgent gestures and cries for assistance led the tanker's crew to quickly rescue him. Upon pulling him aboard, they made a grim discovery. The lifeless body of a young red-haired girl, clad in a life jacket, was lying on the floor of the dinghy. The man introduced himself as Julian Harvey, captain of the Bluebelle, and identified the lifeless girl as Terry Jo Duperrault. He recounted a harrowing story from the previous night, claiming that around 8:30 p.m., a violent squall had struck the vessel. The intensity of the storm caused the Bluebelle to capsize and its main mast to snap, leading to a catastrophic sequence of events that resulted in the ship sinking. Harvey presented himself as the sole survivor of a disaster that claimed the lives of 6 passengers, including the 5-member Duperrault family and his own wife, Mary Dean. His account appeared to leave no room for doubt. However, 3 days later, on November 16th, an even more astonishing discovery was made. One member of the Duperrault family had survived and was found floating alone in the sea just hours before, on a small cork and canvas float scarcely larger than a shallow bathtub. Her name was Terry Jo Duperrault, then only 11 years old. Contrary to Julian's belief, the body he had recovered after the sinking of the Bluebelle was that of Terry Jo's younger sister, 7-year-old Renee Duperrault. Terry Jo had been adrift at sea without food or water for 4 days and 3 nights, teetering on the brink of death. By a stroke of luck, she was spotted by the second officer of the Greek freighter, Captain Theo, as it passed through the Northwest Providence Channel. However, when Terry Jo Duperrault shared her account of the events that transpired on the Bluebelle with investigators, it revealed a starkly contradiction to the account previously given by Julian Harvey, exposing his fabrications and revealing the grim truth behind the tragedy. In 1961, 11-year-old Terry Jo Duperrault's life was filled with joy, surrounded by her loving family. Her father, Arthur, a successful optometrist, mother Jean, brother Brian, and her baby sister Renee. Arthur had long harbored a dream to take his family on a global cruise adventure. To realize this dream, he chartered a 60-foot-long twin-masted sailing ketch for a voyage from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to the Bahamas. Lacking the skills to navigate the vessel himself, Arthur enlisted Julian Harvey, a seasoned former World War II fighter pilot, as the captain, with the agreement that his wife, Mary Dean, could join them. On November 8, 1961, the Duperrault family set sail from the port of Fort Lauderdale aboard the Bluebelle, captained by Harvey, filled with anticipation and excitement. The following days were spent exploring the Caribbean islands, offering the children the thrilling experience of snorkeling in the crystal-clear waters. As the journey neared its end, the family embarked on their return trip to Florida on the night of November 12th, eager to experience the nocturnal beauty of the sea. Terry Jo retired to the cabin in the early evening, while the rest of the family remained on deck, the children eventually dozing off and the adults enjoying the final moments of their idyllic vacation. That same night, Terry Jo was jolted awake by her brother's screams, cries so filled with terror that they instantly filled her with dread. The haunting cries of "Help! Daddy, help!" pierced the night, followed by a deafening silence that signaled a horrifying turn of events. Summoning every ounce of courage, Terry Jo ventured up to the main deck, unprepared for the gruesome sight that awaited her. In the kitchen area, she was confronted with a nightmarish scene. Her mother and brother lay motionless, surrounded by a pool of blood. Shock and realization dawned on her simultaneously, preventing her from approaching them, as she somehow understood the irreversible truth of their demise. Driven by a desperate hope to find her father, Terry Jo continued her ascent to the upper level, only to be confronted by Julian Harvey. His eyes, wild and unrecognizable, bore into hers as she inquired about the situation. Instead of an explanation, Harvey forcefully shoved her down the ladder, barking at her to return to her room. In that moment, Terry Jo, still clinging to a child's trust, believed something calamitous had occurred and that Harvey was sparing her from witnessing the aftermath. Back in her cabin, engulfed in fear and confusion, Terry Jo sat on her bed, trying to make sense of the night's events. It was then she noticed water stealthily creeping into her room, a silent testament to the unfolding disaster that had claimed her family and now threatened her own survival. As the realization that the Bluebelle was sinking dawned on Terry Jo, her fear escalated into outright panic. Before she could process her next move, Julian Harvey entered her room, wielding a rifle. His gaze, filled with a terrifying madness, fixed on her briefly before he turned and left without uttering a word. It was clear that Harvey had made a chilling calculation. With the boat sinking, Terry Jo was already doomed. Trapped in her rapidly flooding room, Terry Jo was torn between the terror of what awaited her above deck and the certain peril of remaining below. Eventually, the rising water, causing her mattress to float, forced her decision. She couldn't stay there any longer and braved her way back to the main deck. Upon reaching the deck, she witnessed Harvey lowering the dinghy into the water. Desperate for some acknowledgement or instruction, she asked if the boat was indeed sinking. Harvey, maintaining his silence, dove into the Black Sea, clinging to the drifting dinghy, leaving Terry Jo utterly alone as the Bluebelle succumbed to the depths. In an incredible display of resilience, Terry Jo remembered a life float secured to the deck. With the ship on the brink of vanishing beneath the waves, she acted with decisive courage. She knew the boat was going down, and it was a matter of do or die. She managed to free the cork raft and throw it overboard, clambering into it just as the Bluebelle disappeared. However, her fight for survival was far from over. The rope tethering the raft to the sinking ship threatened to drag her down as well. In the pitch darkness, Terry Jo frantically worked to untie the rope, relying solely on touch and determination. Just as the raft began to sink with the ship's pull, she succeeded in detaching it, securing her precarious refuge on the open sea. Adrift and alone, Terry Jo remained motionless and silent in the raft, enveloped by darkness. The harrowing experience led to a chilling revelation. She realized there was something evil about Captain Harvey. Fearful that Harvey might still find her, she stayed vigilant. Alone on her life float, she made the conscious decision not to cry out for help, haunted by the fear of what Julian Harvey might do if he discovered her. In silence, she waited, clinging to the hope of daylight. As dawn broke, she was greeted by the stark realization that she was utterly alone, with no sign of Harvey or any other form of rescue in sight. Surrounded by an endless sea, her situation seemed increasingly dire. Perched on her cork raft with its interlaced rope bottom, Terry Jo could do little but sit. The relentless parrotfish, drawn to her bleeding feet, added to her torment, picking at her through the raft's openings. The daylight, while a relief from the fears of the night, brought its own form of suffering as the sun's rays scorched her skin, exacerbating her dehydration and hunger. As time wore on, Terry Jo's hope began to wane. The endless expanse of water offered no sign of salvation, and the absence of any passing ship or plane forced her to confront the possibility of her own mortality. Yet she remained vigilant, constantly scanning the horizon for any indication of rescue. The arrival of night brought a new challenge, the struggle to remain awake. Exhaustion enveloped her, leading her mind to wander between consciousness and dreams. In one vivid dream, she imagined seeing the blue lights of an airport runway, with her parents waiting to welcome her at its end. The dream was so compelling that she found herself leaping from the raft in her eagerness to reunite with them, only to be jolted awake by the cold reality of her situation. On the morning of November 14th, as the first light of dawn pierced the horizon, Terry Jo's eyes caught sight of a small red plane circling overhead. A surge of excitement washed over her, the prospect of rescue igniting a flicker of hope within her weary heart. However, a daunting obstacle stood in her way. The life raft's inconspicuous white color blended seamlessly with the frothy whitecaps of the waves, rendering it nearly invisible against the vast ocean canvas. Agonized by the close encounter with the red search plane, so near she felt she could almost touch it, Terry Jo made a desperate attempt to make herself seen. She removed her blouse and waved it frantically, her screams lost in the vastness of the sea, pleading for the eyes above to notice her presence. The plane made a dive, coming tantalizingly close, allowing her to see the intricate details of its underside. She was convinced that her ordeal was about to end, that the plane would signal her rescue. But her hopes were dashed as it flew away, leaving her alone once more on the endless sea. In the days that followed, Terry Jo spotted a ship on the horizon. With renewed desperation, she paddled with her hands and feet, but the daunting reality set in that she could never reach it in time. Each passing ship that failed to notice her dimmed her hope further. By November 16th, after 4 grueling days and nights adrift, Terry Jo's spirit had been battered by the relentless sun and sea. The once hopeful glances toward any boat or plane had ceased. Her mind now drifted in a haze of exhaustion and despair. Her lips swollen and cracked, and her skin scorched by the sun. Her body was racked with pain, and her consciousness was slipping away. The ships that passed, like ghostly apparitions, no longer spurred any reaction. They were just distant shapes on the horizon, fading in and out of her dwindling awareness. Amidst the sprawling expanse of the sea, covered in deceptive whitecaps, a Greek freighter navigated the Providence Channel in the Bahamas. It was on this vessel that a vigilant crew member scanning the horizon noticed an anomaly, a whitecap that, unlike the others, remained constant, refusing to vanish with the ebb and flow of the waves. Through his binoculars, the lookout initially mistook Terry Jo for a fisherman adrift in a small boat. However, he quickly realized the improbability of a fisherman being out at sea in such a fragile craft under those conditions. The sight of Terry Jo, clinging to life on her tiny raft, must have appeared surreal to the crew, especially considering her dire state, teetering on the brink of unconsciousness, almost lost to a coma induced by severe exposure and dehydration. At the same time, back in Miami, Harvey was facing further questioning by the U.S. Coast Guard. In the midst of his interrogation, an officer burst into the room with unexpected news. A survivor had been found. Harvey's immediate exclamation, "Oh my God," followed by a composed, "Isn't that wonderful?" betrayed a sudden shift in his demeanor. Seizing an opportunity to escape the intensifying scrutiny, he requested to be excused, citing exhaustion and a desire to contact his late wife's relatives. Leaving the interrogation, Harvey drove a short distance along Biscayne Boulevard before checking into the Sandman Motel under a false identity. The following morning, the motel's maid made a grim discovery. Julian Harvey was found dead in his room, his life ended by his own hand, leaving behind a trail of questions and the chilling mystery of the Bluebelle's tragic fate. Terry Jo's condition was critical by the time of her rescue. Her heart rate was erratic, and her kidneys were failing, bringing her perilously close to death. Upon her arrival at Mercy Hospital, she was completely unconscious, her body in shock from the ordeal. The medical team, upon evaluating her, noted her condition as serious, but were cautiously optimistic about her chances of recovery. On November 20th, from her hospital bed, Terry Jo bravely recounted the events that unfolded on the Bluebelle to the investigators. Her testimony was a damning contradiction to the account previously given by Julian Harvey, exposing his fabrications and revealing the grim truth behind the tragedy. She confirmed that the Bluebelle had been deliberately scuttled, an act that preceded the murder of her family and Mary Jordan Harvey. Terry Jo's survival and subsequent testimony were crucial in uncovering the truth behind the tragic events that led to the loss of her family and the eventual demise of Julian Harvey. The tragic events aboard the Bluebelle left many questions unanswered, particularly regarding the precise circumstances and sequence in which the Duperrault family and Mary Jordan Harvey lost their lives. Despite the lack of definitive details about how or in what order the victims perished, certain conclusions were drawn based on the evidence and testimonies available. One significant factor considered in the investigation was Julian Harvey's motives. Although the exact reasons for his heinous acts remained elusive, it was noted that Harvey was the sole beneficiary of his wife's insurance policy. His desperate need for financial resources could not be overlooked and suggested a possible motive for his actions. Further scrutiny of Harvey's past revealed a disturbing pattern that lent credence to the theory of premeditated criminal behavior. His history was marred by incidents of insurance fraud involving the deliberate destruction of boats and airplanes, and even more alarmingly, the death of a former wife in what was reported as an automobile accident. This pattern of behavior painted a picture of a man willing to go to extreme lengths for financial gain. The investigation posited that Harvey was likely in the midst of murdering his wife, Mary Jordan Harvey, possibly for the insurance payout, when he was unexpectedly discovered by Arthur Duperrault or other member of family. Faced with the exposure of his crime, Harvey made the grim decision to eliminate all witnesses by murdering the entire Duperrault family and sinking the Bluebelle to obliterate any evidence of his atrocious acts. What Harvey failed to anticipate was the remarkable resilience of 11-year-old Terry Jo Duperrault. Her survival and subsequent rescue not only thwarted his plans, but also provided critical testimony that helped unravel the truth behind the Bluebelle tragedy. Terry Jo returned to Green Bay to live with her father's sister and 3 cousins. When she was 12, she changed her name to Terry. Nearly 50 years later, in 2010, Terry finally revealed the details of the night her family was killed and her days spent drifting in open water in the book Alone, Orphaned on the Ocean. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, be sure to check out the other great content on our channel. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more. Thank you again, and see you in the next video.